Most people who have read the Bible their entire lives think they know what the Nephilim were. Giants. Big people. Unusually tall warriors who lived before the flood and showed up again in Canaan to frighten the Israelite spies. That is the Sunday school answer. And it is not wrong exactly, but it is so incomplete that it might as well be wrong. Because the Bible does not just describe the Nephilim as large human beings. It describes them as something that should not exist. Something that crossed a boundary so fundamental, so absolute, that God responded to their existence with the most catastrophic event in human history. And when you understand what they actually were, not just physically, but spiritually, not just before the flood, but after it, the story becomes one of the darkest and most disturbing things in all of Scripture. Most people are not ready for what the Bible actually says about the Nephilim. But it is in there. Every detail, written in plain sight across Genesis, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Jude, and the book of Enoch that the Apostle Jude quotes directly in the New Testament. And by the time this is over, the word Nephilim will never mean the same thing to you again. To understand what the Nephilim were, you first have to understand what happened on a mountain. Not Sinai, not Moriah, a mountain that most people have never heard of. Mount Hermon. It sits on the border of modern Syria and Lebanon at the northern edge of the land God promised to Israel, 30 miles from Damascus, 9,000 feet above sea level, permanently snow-capped even in summer, visible from hundreds of miles away on a clear day. And according to the ancient Jewish text of 1st Enoch, a book quoted word for word by the Apostle Jude in the New Testament, making it one of the most directly referenced extra-biblical texts in Scripture, Mount Hermon is where it began. The text describes a group of supernatural beings, 200 of them. Watchers, the Hebrew word is Erim, beings assigned to observe and guard humanity. They existed in the heavenly realm. They had seen the daughters of men, and they made a decision that would change the trajectory of the entire human story. They descended together to the summit of Mount Hermon, and there they made an oath, a binding covenant with each other, swearing that they would carry out their plan together so that no single one of them could be held individually responsible. They swore on the mountain, and then they came down. The leader of the 200 was a being named Semyaza, and the names of the others are recorded in the ancient text: Azazel, Armaros, Barakijal, Kokabel, Zikiel, Arakiel, Shamsiel, Sariel. Names that carry the suffix El, the Hebrew word for God, because they were created beings who had once existed in the presence of the divine. They took human wives, exactly as Genesis chapter 6 describes. The sons of God saw the daughters of men and took them. But what happened next goes far beyond the production of giant offspring. Because the Watchers did not just interbreed with humanity, they corrupted it from the inside. The book of Enoch records what they taught the people they were living among. And the list is specific. Azazel taught men to make swords and shields and breastplates. He taught them the art of metalworking, the forging of weapons. He showed women the art of beautification, cosmetics, jewelry, ornaments used to seduce. He taught sorcery and the cutting of roots and the knowledge of plants used for forbidden purposes. Semyaza taught enchantments and the cutting of roots. Others taught astrology, the movements of celestial bodies used for divination. Others taught the knowledge of clouds and signs, and the earth and the reading of the stars as omens. Knowledge that was not given to humanity by God. Knowledge that was introduced from outside the boundaries of what humanity was meant to have at that stage. And the corruption spread. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5. God looked at the earth and saw that the wickedness of man was great, that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That is not describing normal human sinfulness. Normal human sinfulness is inconsistent. moments of darkness alongside moments of decency. What Genesis 6 describes is total saturation, every intention, only evil, continually. Something had gone so deeply wrong in the pre-flood world that ordinary human moral failure cannot fully account for it. The corruption the Watchers introduced, the forbidden knowledge, the forbidden unions, the forbidden bloodlines, had permeated the civilization so completely that there was nothing left that was not contaminated. Except one family. But before we get to the flood and what came after it, we need to talk about what the Nephilim actually were. Because their physical size, as extraordinary as it was only the surface of something far more disturbing. The word Nephilim in Hebrew comes from the root nephal, to fall, the fallen ones, those who were fallen, or those who caused others to fall. Ancient Jewish scholarship consistently understood them as the offspring of the Watchers and human women, hybrid beings carrying the genetic material of both supernatural and human parentage. And they were enormous. Not just tall, not just large-framed. Enormous in a way that the Bible records matter-of-factly, as if the writers expected the reader to understand the scale without flinching. Numbers chapter 13. The Israelite spies enter Canaan and encounter the descendants of Anak, one of the giant clans traced back to the Nephilim. Their report upon returning makes the entire congregation of Israel weep in terror. We seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Grasshoppers. That is not hyperbole for a man who is 6'5". That is the visceral description of people who encountered something so far outside the boundaries of normal human scale that their minds could not process it as human at all. Deuteronomy chapter 3. Og, king of Bashan. His iron bed was over 13 feet long and 6 feet wide, recorded in scripture as if it were archaeological evidence. Here is the physical proof of what we are telling you. Come see the bed if you do not believe us. 1 Chronicles chapter 20. The final references to the giant clans in scripture, 4 of them named specifically. One had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. 24 digits in total. One taunted Israel and was struck down by David's nephew. One whose spear had a shaft like a weaver's beam. These were not isolated anomalies. They were the remnants of a population, the last surviving members of a hybrid lineage that had once been numerous enough to fill cities and terrify armies. But here is what most people never ask about the Nephilim. What happened to them when they died? This is where the story goes somewhere most Christians have never followed it. When a human being dies, the body returns to the dust, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. That is the pattern established in Genesis and affirmed throughout Scripture. Human death has a destination. But the Nephilim were not fully human. Their spirits were not fully human spirits. And according to ancient Jewish understanding that the New Testament writers were familiar with, and in some cases directly referenced, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim did not follow the pattern of human death. They had nowhere to go. They were not human enough to follow the path of human spirits. They were not fully supernatural enough to return to the heavenly realm. They existed in a category that creation had not made provision for. Hybrid beings whose physical death produced disembodied spirits trapped in a realm between. The Book of Enoch, chapter 15. God speaks directly to this question. You were in heaven, but its secrets had not yet been revealed to you. You knew worthless mysteries, and in the hardness of your hearts you have revealed these to the women, and through these mysteries, women and men work much evil on the earth. You have not had a proper spiritual existence, and therefore you shall find no peace. The evil spirits that came out of their bodies shall be called evil spirits on the earth, and their dwelling shall be on the earth. Evil spirits on the earth. disembodied, without a dwelling of their own. Described in the New Testament as entities that seek to inhabit physical bodies because they no longer have one. Matthew chapter 12. An unclean spirit goes out of a man and wanders through waterless places, seeking rest and finding none. Waterless places, the wilderness. The same language used in ancient texts to describe the realm between, the place where disembodied spirits wander without a home. When Jesus cast demons out of people in the Gospels, the demons consistently asked the same question: "Have you come to destroy us?" Or in the account of the Gadarene demoniac, "Do not send us into the abyss." The abyss. The place of imprisonment reserved for the watchers themselves, the supernatural beings whose rebellion produced the Nephilim. Jude, verse 6. The angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. The fathers are imprisoned. Their offspring wander, both waiting for a judgment that has not yet come. This is the world the flood created, not a clean reset. A world where the physical bodies of the Nephilim were destroyed by water, but their spirits remained, disembodied, active, seeking, looking for hosts. And then the floodwaters receded, and Noah's family walked out of the ark onto dry ground, and humanity began again. And the Nephilim came back, not in the same way, not through the same mechanism. The watchers were imprisoned. Jude and 2 Peter both confirm that the beings responsible for the original corruption were bound and are held in chains awaiting judgment. That particular doorway was shut. But the giant clans that appeared in Canaan after the flood, the Anakim, the Rephaim, the descendants of Anak and Og, point to a second incursion, a second corruption event, smaller in scale than the first, more contained, but real. Genesis 6 verse 4 had already warned this would happen. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. After the flood. After the reset. The text does not explain the mechanism of the second appearance. It simply states it as fact. They were there before. They came back after. And this is why the commands God gave Israel when they entered Canaan were what they were. Destroy them completely. The Anakim, the Rephaim, the giant clans in the hill country, leave nothing alive. From the outside, these commands have troubled readers for centuries. They sound like genocide. They sound disproportionate. They sound like the elimination of innocent people who had done nothing personally to deserve destruction. But they were not random populations. They were the surviving remnants of a hybrid lineage, the last physical vessels of a bloodline that had been introduced into the human family through supernatural corruption, a bloodline that carried the genetic memory of the Watchers, a bloodline that, if left to reproduce and spread, would recontaminate the human population the flood had been designed to purify. The same emergency, the same logic, the same war fought in a different generation by different means. And Israel mostly obeyed. The giant clans were largely destroyed. Joshua drove out the Anakim from the hill country. City after city fell. The Rephaim were scattered. The last of the giant kings died on battlefields recorded in the books of Joshua and Samuel. Almost entirely eliminated. Almost, because one city was missed. One remnant survived. Gaza, Gath, Ashdod, the Philistine cities of the coastal plain, and in Gath, a city that would become infamous in the biblical narrative, the last great giant was born, Goliath, the final confrontation in a war that had begun on Mount Hermon before the flood. The last descendant of the giant clan standing in the valley of Elah, challenging Israel taunting the armies of the living God. And a shepherd boy put a stone in a sling and ended it. David was not just killing a large enemy soldier. He was closing the final chapter of a 4,000-year war between the seed of the woman and the corrupted bloodline that had been trying to prevent the promised seed from ever arriving. After David. After Goliath. After the last of the giant clans were destroyed. The physical Nephilim presence disappears from Scripture entirely. But the disembodied spirits, the entities that came out of their bodies when the flood destroyed them, those are still here. Still active. Still seeking. And Jesus said something that should make every reader stop. Matthew chapter 24, verse 37. As were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. As were the days of Noah. Not just moral corruption, not just widespread sin, the days of Noah specifically. The days of Genesis 6. The days when the sons of God came down and took human wives and produced the Nephilim and corrupted the bloodline and filled the earth with a darkness so complete that God called it an emergency. Jesus said those days are coming again. What that looks like. What form it takes. What the second return of the conditions of Genesis 6 means for the generation that lives through it. That is a question the prophets wrote about and the apostles warned about, and the book of Revelation describes in language that most readers find impossible to visualize. But Jesus said, it is coming. And the days of Noah began on a mountain called Hermon, with 200 beings who swore an oath and descended into a world that had no idea what was about to walk among them. The Nephilim were not just giants. They were the physical evidence of a war, a cosmic collision between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, fought across 4,000 years of human history on a battlefield most people cannot see. They existed. They were enormous. They were hybrid. Their spirits outlasted their bodies. They returned after the flood. They were systematically hunted by Israel under divine command. And the last of them fell in a valley when a shepherd boy refused to be afraid of something that had been terrifying armies for generations. They should not have existed. But they did. And the world has never been the same. If this disturbed you in a way you were not expecting, good. That means you heard what the Bible was actually saying. Not the sanitized version, not the Sunday school version, the real version. Written in plain sight across Genesis and Numbers and Deuteronomy and Jude and the words of Jesus himself. Share this with someone who thinks they know the Bible, because most people have never heard this story told the way it was actually written. Every video on this channel is built to take you somewhere most documentaries never go. Hidden history, ancient darkness, the things buried in Scripture that explain more about the world than anything you will ever find on the surface. Subscribe to Eden Uncovered and turn on notifications so you never miss one. The hidden history of the Bible is deeper than you know, and we are just getting started.